morning, good afternoon, good evening. So the last episode that we just finished, congratulations on getting through that. It was long. There was a lot in there and several stops to talk about sort of history in general. So, especially after coming off the 10th century, which was super short, I'm sure it was depressing to realize how long that last lecture was. So we'll try and keep this one moving. You know the drill. Make sure you look at the slides at the end, check the sources. I won't belabor that anymore. Now you've heard it a dozen times, so I'm going to let it go. Instead, we're going to jump right in. So the 12th century would be from 1100 to 1199, or 1101 to 1200 if you like. Okay, so far we've been dealing with either a major city or these very independent, basically subsistence agriculture communities in Europe. And crossing in between those two things are nomads, traders, people that don't really have a fixed home, okay? True city people don't have a lot of interaction with true country people and vice versa. That is starting to change. The 12th century would be the beginning of the time period historians really start to recognize the existence and influence of towns. Okay, a town is not a city, smaller than a city. These towns are starting to become centers of commerce on their own. Okay, and the far-seeing feudal lords and kings find it in their interest to be supportive of these towns. Okay, so usually the way that's shown is by granting the town a charter. And if there's a situation arises where they want to have a church in the town, the king would help them build a church, things like that. The big landowners, the castle lords that you kind of have in your imagination, will have problems in terms of violence if they don't give the town a certain level of autonomy. And so this is a turning point, another moment of development where your little towns here start to grow and start to flourish. So next, in 1101, Robert Curthose, who is the son of William the Conqueror, he's the Duke of Normandy, comes back from the First Crusade. He has brothers who stayed behind. He left. He went crusading, and he mortgaged his duchy in Normandy to pay for it, right? So he's the Duke of Normandy, and he turned over it's like Monopoly. He turned over the card. He mortgaged his duchy so he could pay for his trip to the Crusades. And now he's back, and he wants his stuff back, and he can't get it. So he invades England in an attempt to take the throne of England from his brother, Henry, and he fails. So that's that. At the same time, in southern France, a group of artists called troubadours appear. And if, again, I've been warning you about F. Smith, I'd be careful. So secular poems and poetry have been discouraged. That is true. And we're going to find out almost right away one of the reasons why. The troubadours' secular work is allegedly focused on love stories and chivalry, but these tend to end up being kind of obscene. They sing of the lives of the courts of the noblemen. They're not just guys making up dirty poems and sappy love songs. It's very carefully structured. There's predetermined types of symbolism, allegory, imagery. There's a right way to do troubadour poetry, but it does tend to be a little on the risque side compared to the religious poetry that had been encouraged and patronized by the church, as much as art had been encouraged and patronized by the church during that time period that we were calling the Dark Ages. In China, by 1116, the Chinese are using books, stitched together books of printed pages. China is flourishing in terms of science and art. They're using a magnetic compass, okay? And that's not a new invention, but they're using it regularly. This is something that's in continuous use now. Every Chinese trading ship has a magnetic compass kind of thing. But China is still weak militarily, so they are still having the same kind of trading of power amongst warlords and assassinations and coups, and tribal nomads come in and take over every few years, kind of instability in their political rule. But they're still very much developing in terms of art, science, literature, things like that. Very interesting. Okay, so in 1122, important moment, the Concordat of Worms. Okay, this is a city. It's Worms. Okay, this is a city in Germany. The Concordat of Worms is signed. This is an agreement between the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope. And it tries to draw the line on who can do what in terms of appointing bishops. That's a little bit of an oversimplification, but that's the main part. If you haven't listened to me about F. Smitha, here we go again. This is a period of difficulty for the church. Okay, the very close relationship between the church and the empire starts to become a source of weakness and not a source of strength. The bishops have always been political figures. This has been true since the beginning, especially since the 300s and the legalization of Christianity in the Roman Empire. The bishops are real, true secular authorities. Often they're effectively the governor or mayor in some places, in provinces and cities. We've talked about that. We talked about Heribert and how he's basically a national hero in northern Italy. And we've talked in the past, this is great if you want Catholicism to be legal. It's less great if you're looking for there to be a clean line between spiritual and worldly authority. Okay, so if you're reusing the F. Smitha site, okay, and any other secular historian, they're going to start saying things like, oh, the church is afraid, people are going to start to read, and they won't be compliant sheep, and that's not accurate for a couple reasons. The first reason is we are a very long way from the point in history where lots of people are literate. Okay, yes, more people are going to be reading starting now. It's not many. It's certainly not a majority. Okay, so that's a little bit of a red herring. The second thing is, this is a time where the church is not able to see the future. The church cannot envision what safety and independence for religious observance is going to look like if they don't hold the secular authority themselves. Okay, they don't know how they're going to continue to be free to worship. Okay, as messed up as some of the individual bishops might be in their personal lives, and as corrupt as some things are, they're still looking for the freedom to worship, and they don't know how they're going to ensure that if they're not also the governor or the mayor or what have you, okay? So we can see the future, and we know the short answer is they cannot. We know, even in the world today, there's plenty of places where worldly power makes it difficult or impossible for the church to be independent. Okay, they don't know that. They don't know it's impossible. They're still trying to figure out how to get both to work. And this is the process, okay? And so your secular histories are going to have a very negative view. It's like, oh, the church is trying to hold on to power. The church is trying to keep everybody stupid and illiterate. And that's really not an accurate picture. The church is looking for a path to keep both kinds of power because they've had it and it's been fine. What are they going to do as it starts to slip away? Okay, and mistakes are going to be made. Not saying that these men who are leading the church are not going to make mistakes. I'm saying that be careful when you're reading these sources. Don't give the wrong motivations to these individuals. Okay, so what happens at the Concordat of Worms? It's trying to settle the dispute between the emperor and the king. Between the emperor and the pope about bishops. But there's other stuff in there. It emphasizes priestly celibacy. It outlaws simony, which is selling indulgences, selling religious things, selling spiritual things. And it's trying to figure out this bishop thing. And this is the picture of the cathedral at Worms. So there you go. That's the Concordat of Worms in 1122. In 1128, the Catholic Church sanctions, that's like giving a charter, to the Knights Templar, which you cannot possibly tell from this very pixelated picture. But what they are doing is given a charter or a sanction, and their role is to guard the road between the Mediterranean port city of Acre, which is held by the Crusader kings, and the Holy City. And the Templars are not just a couple crusaders with a really fierce reputation. This is now a large group of men, and they take vows of both poverty and chastity. And if anybody was wearing that crusader suit that the whole internet makes memes out of, that would be the Knights Templar, the white garb with a red cross on it. That was their distinctive garb. So they are guarding the road to and from Jerusalem. Okay? At about the same time, in 1139, the country of Portugal is being born. Count Alfonso Enriquez, who is only 29 years old. Some of this is amazing how young some of these guys are as they're like conquering all of Europe. He has formed an alliance with discontented noblemen who are in the northern part of Spain. And he's been fighting against the king of Leon and Castile. And he has also been defeating the Muslims. Right? So the lands that he is able to free from either Leon and Castile or the Muslims on the westernmost part of Spain, so the west coast of Spain, he declares these lands independent and himself the king. And this is what we're going to start calling Portugal. The next year, the University of Bologna is founded, and that's a law school. And we didn't talk about him. He's complicated and important, but a man named Peter Abelard is condemned by the Council of Sens for heresy, and he goes to Rome to defend himself. And Peter Abelard is another one of these characters. He's sort of like Galileo. Everybody makes him into this great hero who resisted persecution from the church. And A, he wasn't really persecuted, and B, he deserved it. And eventually, yes, he was persecuted. There's a lot more to his story than just, oh, the church was mean to him. So, in 1140, an Italian monk named Gratian, yes, same word as the emperor, Gratian begins to compile and then sort of deconflict the laws of the church that deal with what they called at the time external theology. And that would be like the rules which get you through your daily life of being a Catholic. The vast majority of the rules actually have more to do with how priests and bishops do their jobs, but there are sections that affect the laity too. Eventually, this will be called the Code of Canon Law, but not for a really long time. Gratian's the first person who tries to put all these older laws together in one place and reconcile contradictions, which come from variations. These sets of laws have been written for different cities, different popes, different languages, different centuries, and he was the first person that puts them all in one spot. What he compiles is not adopted by the church as an official collection of law, but it's the only thing that anybody uses for these types of rules until 1918, when the first Code of Canon Law is published. In 1143, in the city of Cologne, a mob breaks into the church prison, the ecclesiastical prison, and pulls a bunch of accused heretics out into the street and burns them at the stake. So that's nice. If you don't believe mobs can get that crazy, I have got news for you. People get really weird when they think some other group of people is putting them in danger or is ignoring an important rule. And so there's quite a bit of art about this as well. In 1143, the church acknowledges or recognizes Alfonso Enriquez, and they give him the title King of Portugal. And this is done at the signing of the Treaty of Zamora. So the lands that Alfonso had freed from the Muslims and had taken from the King of Castile are put under the protection of the church, and he's given that title, King of Portugal. In 1144, a Muslim warlord named Imad al-Din Zangi, I presume, has been trying to extend his power against other groups of Muslims. And so he comes in and he captures the weakest of the Crusader states, which is Edessa. And that's sort of the southernmost of the Crusader states that were established at the end of the First Crusade. So he retakes Edessa from the Christians. Meanwhile, in one of the stranger things from this century, so we've got Normans, and those are like French barbarian type people, right? So the Normans are also pirates, and they've gotten bored with the outside coast, and so now they're coming into the Mediterranean Sea, and they've seized the North African city of Tripoli, which is where the Muslim pirates were operating. So they have a pirate war, and they take over, and they establish what's called the Kingdom of Africa. So the Normans are ruling Sicily, which they've taken from the Muslims, and they're effectively ruling southern Italy at this time. Now they've added this Kingdom of Africa, which they established in 1135, and as you can see from this lovely Italian map, is only going to last till 1160. So the same guys that are conquering England are also conquering the inner Mediterranean at this time. It's like, all right, pop quiz time. Where did I say Edessa was? I said southernmost, and it's too difficult to go back and correct a recording. So let's just make sure that we understand our geography here. Edessa is the northernmost of the Crusader states. It's also it was the weakest. It was the least well defended, etc. Okay, Edessa in the north. Also, if you were paying attention, I just mentioned Tripoli. This is not the same Tripoli. Tripoli is a city in North Africa, way off to the left of this map. The county of Tripoli is a different place. So beware the maps. Beware trying to remember all of this, too. I agree and admit it's complicated. So, all right, so Zengi takes Edessa. And the Europeans are like, oh, this is the first move against Jerusalem. We've got to do something. So, the German Emperor, Conrad II, and the French King, Louis VII, lead another big Crusader army. This is the Second Crusade. And they're going to retake Edessa for Christendom. Okay? Pope Eugene III is the Pope. He does officially call the crusade, just like the first one was called by the Pope. So we've got two kings, and our preacher this time is Bernard of Clairvaux. So he is commissioned to go out and preach the Second Crusade. Which, of course, this crusade gets a response from the Seljuk Turks, who battle the Crusaders. And this is going to be, they're going to retake Edessa. It's not conclusive. Usually the Crusades effectively end in either a draw or a brief Christian victory before all the Christians have to go back home and the Muslims retake it. So, at the same time, a crusade without a number begins. A group of soldiers sail to the Iberian Peninsula and are trying to help King Alfonso of Spain in his south-moving campaigns against the Muslims. They take Lisbon, which will become the capital of Portugal. And sometimes these crusades that are fought in Spain are called the Iberian Crusade or Iberian Crusades. Sometimes they're not. So these crusades count, but they're not in the list. They're not numbered. They're just part of the group. So when people ask you how many crusades are there, you know there's like, oh, the 6th crusade. Well, this one would make it 7, and so the counting is off. So don't worry about their names or numbers. You just need to have some idea. There are the crusades into the Holy Land. There are crusades in Spain. There are actually also crusades in Scandinavia. There's a crusade to Finland. Okay? And an army going to try and create a new home for the Catholic faith. That's going to be a crusade. Or retake an old home. So, in the spirit of the Second Crusade, another Christian army leaves Jerusalem, which is controlled by the Christians, and it attacks the Muslim city of Damascus. And this is supposed to be in retaliation for Damascus being allied with Zengi. So the Christian army besieges the city of Damascus, but they fail to capture it. And this becomes a really long, drawn-out campaign. And this phrase, the Christian alliance, and the Second Crusade starts to fall apart. There's deaths from starvation, from disease, from injuries, from battle. And in the end, when the last of the Crusaders leave and the Second Crusade is considered over, everything stays the way it was. Edessa remains under Muslim control. Damascus was not taken. The Christians do still control Jerusalem for the time being. So really nothing happens. No, there's no change as a result of the Second Crusade. In 1150, the University of Paris is founded. Very important. Not a lot to say, but very important. By 1154, we've seen a change in the structure of the Knights Templar. They basically don't take the vow of poverty anymore. Alongside another Christian order in Jerusalem, the Knights Hospitalier, they have become the owners of real estate and the bankers in Jerusalem. They deal in exports, and part of their income comes from handling the thousands, usually 5, 6, 7,000 pilgrims a year that come to visit the Holy Land. Okay, and so they're allowed to do this because one of the things that they're allowed to make money from trade, because this protects them from the temptation to sell the pilgrims into slavery, which had been a problem with Italian merchants who had been sort of trying to do this same role, like, oh, we'll trade your money and we'll sell you souvenirs and we'll give you tours of the Holy Land and then we'll sell you slaves. That was a problem. So the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller are allowed to make money to discourage them from selling the pilgrims into slavery when they get to the Holy Land. So that's nice. What else? We haven't done Japan in a while, but they've been there. So in 1160, there's, again, very much like China, there's an ongoing cycle of warfare amongst groups of very powerful clans, very powerful families. And so in 1160, the Taira and Minamoto clans fight a war called the Heiji War, or the Heiji Rebellion. And the Taira clan wins, and the Minamotos are kind of, relegated to the background for a while. So this art print is of the emperor escaping the palace in the night before the Tairas come and take over. All right, so in 1163, an ootsy-cootsy little baby named Temujin is born to a nomad family in the Hentian-Nuro Mountains. So this is at the end of the Amur River, inland from, you can see modern China, modern Mongolia, modern Russia. This is very close to the modern capital of Mongolia, which is a city named Ulaanbaatar. So, cute little baby Temujin. Obviously, this is not an actual picture of him, but it's still a cute little Mongolian baby. Temujin is going to grow up to be, does anybody want to guess? Maybe like the most famous Mongol ever, right? But he's still a cute baby. Doesn't like a picture of a cute baby. In 1163, in Paris, construction begins on a cathedral on an island in the middle of the Seine River. And this is going to be named, eventually, what do you think? Notre Dame. So Notre Dame de Paris. And this is the beginning of its construction. It's not finished in 63, it's started. So that brings me to a recommendation. I don't often recommend videos. It's hard to find things that are fair to the church, that are good quality, that are free, that don't have any kind of sketchy content. So I can recommend both of these videos. They're both on YouTube. They're both free. They're from the mid-1980s, okay? And I'll just tell you up front, the animation and the clothes that people are wearing are a little cringy, but if you can get through that, there's some really good footage with Gothic cathedrals and castles throughout these, good explanations of how they were built in the first place. You learn the names of the parts of the cathedral and the castle, and the sections which show how how a bell is made, how stained glass is made. These are really interesting. You can watch this with the whole family. Each one is less than an hour long, and yes, you're going to laugh. Okay, you will laugh at some of the story sequences and some of the drawings. That's fine. Go ahead. It's funny. Okay, 1986 was a rough year for fashion, but they're good history. Okay, so you can watch these. These are okay to watch. So either search for exactly these terms using the quotes, or it's supposed to be a clickable link. If you can click through from my video, that's cool. These are extra, not required, but fun and interesting if you're not doing anything else and you want to watch a video about how to build a cathedral. It's pretty cool. In 1167, the city of Copenhagen is founded. So how does that happen? So listen carefully to this description. A Danish soldier and archbishop named Absalon fortifies a village. So he builds a fortress in a village, and this will become the city of Copenhagen. And the purpose of building the fortress is to repel attacks from the sea by these Slavic pirates. Okay, so this is the seal of the city of Copenhagen, and obviously you can still see the bishop's fortress right there in the seal of the city. So Copenhagen is founded. The first classes are held at the University of Oxford in 1168. In 1170, Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, is hacked to death at the altar of his church by knights who are agents of England's king, Henry II. This is a long story. You should learn it. The short answer is Henry wanted to do stuff, and Beckett's like, no, I don't think that's allowed. That's not on the list of things you're allowed to do. And Henry, so the legend goes, basically is like, oh, this Thomas Becket guy, who's going to rid me of him? And these four zealous Jews were like, oh, we will so do that. And so they went and killed Becket while he was saying Mass. In 1175, in Egypt, a Muslim warlord named Salah al-Din, who obviously we are going to make that into Saladin, declares his independence from the existing caliphate. So it had been a Shiite dynasty called the Fatimids, and they're basically no longer effective rulers. And Saladin is a Kurd, that's a different ethnic group, and he had been basically a mercenary working for the Seljuk Turks, and he becomes sultan, he becomes military leader, and he wants to revive Sunni Islam in Egypt and drive the Crusaders out of the Middle East. So he is a very capable military and political leader who adopts this religious ideology in order to inspire his followers. Okay, and so he becomes very powerful, very well known. The windmill is invented, or maybe not invented, but becomes a standard source of power in the Netherlands. So basically, the wind is a better source of power than water because in the wintertime, all the streams are frozen, but it's always windy. So by 1180, this is how power is being produced for things like millstones and simple machinery in the area that's north of France and west of Germany. In 1182, King Philip Augustus, who is also Philip II, both same person, Philip II of France, Philip Augustus of France, same person. He needs money. He's having war problems with his feudal lords and barons, and so he confiscates the wealth of the Jews and kicks them out of France. So this is the expulsion of the Jews from France. This is the painting. If you haven't already picked up on it, people do not tend to like the Jews, and they do not tend to tolerate them when times get tough, right? Anytime there's a problem, it always seems like the Jews are the first to go. So you can see they're being kicked out of their homes by the soldiers. They're told, get out, you're not welcome. So it's nice that he doesn't just kill them all, which is often what happens to the Jews. He just kicks them out. So yay, what a hero. In 1184, this is Pope Lucius III, and he issues a bull. We know what a bull is, right? Just a document. A bull against heretics. And the purpose of this bull is to define punishments. Okay, you can't just do whatever you want to a heretic. You need to be subject to a specific type of punishment, and they're laid out in there. And he also sort of sets up this hierarchy of punishments. Like anybody who shields or gives aid to a heretic will be given the same punishment as the heretic. Okay? If you are unrepentant, if you are found guilty of heresy and are not repentant, the church will turn you over to the secular government, and whatever the government does to punish you is the government's business. Okay? And if you relapse, if you are repentant, but then go back to your heretical ways, you get a harsher sentence than whatever you were going to be given earlier. So these things start to be written down and laid out and made into some kind of a consistent system. All right, yay, math jokes. In 1185, in India, a man named Bhaskara sort of invents calculus. Okay, he figured things out like the time it takes for the Earth to orbit the sun. Okay, very, very complicated, advanced mathematical concepts, and this is 3, 4, or 5 centuries ahead of when this stuff comes to light, or excuse me, when this stuff starts to get figured out in Europe. So, got to make my math joke here. I didn't learn algebra properly when I was in high school. Okay, so I still don't like it. I can't be a history teacher and miss this chance to complain about math, but you all definitely should learn it right. You'll be happier later. Same for Latin. If you learn it right now, everything will be easier later in life. So, anyway, haha. Okay, Philip Augustus. What did I say? He's also called, right? Philip II. In 1186, he defeats a coalition of feudal lords in Flanders, Burgundy, and Champagne, and expands his territory. So Philip Augustus is the guy in blue. So in 1180, he's basically only owns the blue part. That is Paris and the immediate surroundings, and Orleans and the immediate surroundings. Okay, so he is going to take all of these other territories from these lords one by one. So by 1223, the blue is controlled by the king. So you can see his territory expanding. In 1187, Saladin retakes basically all of Palestine, including Jerusalem. All of those Crusader states have fallen, and Saladin has taken back over. Okay, and he is a hero for Islam. This is him coming into Jerusalem. Okay, and the Europeans don't like that. So in 1189, so it takes 2 years, the Third Crusade begins. Okay, so you've got your Pope calls the crusade. Apparently, I didn't write the Pope's name down. That's not good. And then you've got your kings. Okay, so in the Third Crusade, handy, you've got 3 kings. Richard I of England, that's Richard the Lionheart. Philip Augustus of France, and Frederick Barbarossa of Germany. And the 3 kings are going to lead this Third Crusade. So in 1191, they arrive at the port city of Acre, which, if we remember, the Templars were supposed to be controlling the road from Acre to Jerusalem. So obviously, they're not doing so hot. So the Crusaders arrive at Acre, and Richard and the others besiege the city. Okay, Saladin is not able to break the siege, and so in July, the city falls to the Crusaders. What do the Crusaders do? Well, the first thing they do is slaughter 4,000 Muslim prisoners, and then they move on to the coastal town of Jaffa. So we've got 2 coastal cities under control of the Crusaders. In 1192, they besiege Jerusalem, but Saladin is able to hold them off. So what happens next? So this is the surprising part. King Richard the Lionheart on the left and Saladin on the right sign a treaty. Okay, so this is an important moment. The Saladin was considered to be, first of all, I mentioned, very capable military and political ruler, and he was considered to be a fair enemy, right? A worthy opponent, a guy who was, yes, the bad guy, and yes, killing the Christians that were fighting him, but he was honorable. Okay, he did not do things that we would consider, like we would today call it a war crime. He tended to be decent in his dealings with his enemies. So, and the Christian kings respect that. So they sign a treaty, and the treaty says Jerusalem remains under Muslim control, but Christian pilgrims will be allowed to visit freely. And the coastal towns that have been captured and the area of Cyprus will be controlled by the Christians. Okay, so the Third Crusade ends with a treaty being signed, and then Richard goes home. He leaves. So the Third Crusade is over. Many people in Europe obviously are going to see it as a failure because Jerusalem remains in the hands of Muslims. But it ends with an agreement that is at least satisfactory to all of the combatant leaders. Okay, all the warring parties agree to this solution. So that tells you a lot about how the Christians perceive Saladin specifically. This would not have been something they were going to do with some of these other enemies so far. So, In 1193, different groups of Muslim warriors are leaving Afghanistan and going into India. And they've been raiding. And if you recall, we were getting our elephant train every year of tribute. And now they're going to stay. They make it as far as Delhi. And they overwhelm, crush, and obliterate the Hindus who are in opposition. And they start developing this Muslim empire in northern Italy. India, not Italy. India. And that brings us basically to the end of the century. So commerce is growing, and at the end of the 1100s, the seaport of Venice has become Europe's commercial capital. So the population of Venice is now around 80,000 people. It's just as big as Paris, Milan, Florence, the leading cities of Europe. So that tells you, obviously, mobility is increasing again. We're able to somewhat freely travel around the Mediterranean again. The fact that trade is growing, commerce is now a source of wealth, where it had been warfare was a source of wealth. Commerce is increasingly a source of wealth. Okay, so more changes are coming for European society. And that's it. I kept this one shorter for you. You're welcome. You know the drill. Pause it here. Check out the sources. Yes, they're the same as they have been. And I will see you next time.